Look how useful the Encyclopedia Judaica is. Does a brilliant thing. Okay, gentlemen, what I'd like to do is I'd like to discuss first something about Hanukkah, and then we're going to discuss certain things about the Pasha, and see how many things we get done tonight. There are lots of interesting things to be seen over here. We'll start with something on Hanukkah. And if I were to ask you, I remember, hi Avi, if I remember that when we were in Cheder, we had this discussion, where does Hanukkah come up in the Torah? So some people will tell you the 25th word of the Torah is Or, light, right? So 25th word of the Torah is Or, is light, so that's a great thing. But here, the Ramban Nachmanides has a very important comment to be made over here, and we're going to see it. And it comes right after the rededication of the temple, the dedication, not rededication of the temple. The temple was dedicated, and what happens after the dedication of the temple is what we're going to read tomorrow in the Torah, about the 12 Nisim, the 12 princes, and they all brought the same carbon. If you remember that, right? We had the same carbon. And now we're going to be looking at, after all these 12 carbonos, hi Marcel, we're on page 774 in the Art Scroll Chumashim, if you like. So we finished the whole discussion of the carbonos. We give you a final reckoning of how much everything was worth and how much people gave. And then it says, Vaydaber Hashem Moshe, Hashem said to Moshe, Daber al speak to him, V'amata Elov, and say to him, Me'ha'alos chasaneres, when you raise up the candles, Amul pnei ha'menorah yir shivas haneres, that towards the face of the menorah, meaning either towards the inside, or they should be facing inwards towards the middle, the 7 candles should burn. That's what the Torah says. And Rashi asked the question, Lama nisla pashas ha'menorah pashas hanisim, why is the pasha of the menorah written right next to the pasha of the princes? What does one have to do with the other? And the Torah says, Rashi says, quoting a Medrash Tanchuma, Lefi shekeshara Aaron Chanukas Anisim, when Aaron saw that all the 12 princes brought something, Chol Shah's Naita, he felt very, very weakened. He felt a little bit low in himself, saying, Shalai haya imayim b'Chanukah, lo hu v'lo shiftei. There were 12 princes that brought something, but it did not include the tribe of Levi, and it did not include Aaron. And Aaron says, wait a minute. What about me? How did I get left out on this whole thing? So he was quite upset that he was left out, that his tribe and he himself did not do anything for the dedication of the Beis Hamikdash. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him, Chayecha, I promise you, with your life, Shalcha gedola mishalem, yours is greater than theirs, She'ata madlik u'meitiv esaneres, because you will So, well, we're back. Yeah. So what it says here is that Hashem tried to comfort Aaron, and the way he comforted Aaron was by saying to him, don't worry, you will light the candles every single day in the Mishkan. That's how he comforted him. The question to be asked about that, and Nachmanides asked these questions. He says, I don't understand what's going on over here. How do we understand this? How do we explain this? Why would Aaron be comforted with that answer? Aaron says, I wanted to be part of the inauguration. Says God, don't worry, you have lighting of candles. That's not part of the inauguration. And why is he choosing the lighting of the candles as opposed to anything else? Why didn't we choose another thing? We said, don't worry, you have bringing of a carbon every day. Don't worry, you're considered the Kohen Gadol. Don't worry, you do the Avot every day. Somehow we're choosing the lighting of the candles, and we're saying this lighting of the candles, that is what should make Aaron feel better. Why? Right? That's the question that Rashi asks. That the Ramban Nachmanides asks. Says Nachmanides, therefore we are not talking about a normal type of candles. That's not what we're discussing. Do you know what we're discussing over here? We are discussing the candles of Hanukkah. And the Ramban is telling you that when God came to Aaron and he says to Aaron, you should know there will be a time where the temple will be rededicated again. And that rededication will be done by whom? Will be done by the Levites. Will be done by Shevet Levi. And what will they do for their rededication? They will come and they will light the Neros. And that coming and the lighting of the Neros and the rededicating of the temple is as important to me, if not more important to me, than this carbon, this offering that was brought by the 12 princes. And that's why the Medrash brings specifically this issue of lighting the candles as something to make Aaron feel better, because he says, just like here, you have a dedication that comes with a carbon, there will once again be at a different stage. There will be a dedication that comes with a carbon, that comes with an offering. Okay, and that offering that your shaver will bring will be the lighting of the candles. Okay, so that's why we have Hanukkah in the Torah. That is a famous Ramban Nachmanides mentioned in Parshas Beha'aloscha. I want to now move on to Parshas Miketz. And Parshas Miketz, lots of very interesting things to be spoken about, and we'll see how many of them we get through. Let's see what happens. Let's start with the following. Rav Hirsch says this, but he says he's not very sure if this is correct or if it's incorrect. And it's interesting how he does. Normally he wouldn't say that before a shir, before saying something. However, what we have over here is he's going to discuss the etymology. Rav Hirsch is very into etymology, the roots of words. So if you're looking in the Art Scroll Chumash on page 222, right at the beginning of Parshas Miketz, and he's very into the etymology and the way words have been put together. And now he speaks about Pharaoh. And what does the word Paro mean? What does the word Pharaoh mean? And he says again, that's why he's saying if I'm correct, meaning if the word Pharaoh comes or has a root in the Hebrew. If it didn't have a root in the Hebrew, then it would be irrelevant to discuss this. I said it could very well be that there was a connection between the ancient Hebrew and this ancient Egyptian, and therefore he wants to suggest the following. The word paro, if you take away the hey, you'd be left with the following root. Pei, resh, ayin. Yeah, can you see that? Mm-hmm. Pei, resh, ayin. What does the word pei, resh, ayin mean? So I'll show you a few instances where this word comes up. The first instance is in Parshas Ki Sisa, when the Jewish people have sinned at the golden calf. And there, let me find the verse and I'll show you where it is. Hi, come on in, there's another seat here. Okay, so it says, and it's interesting because if you look at this in the Torah, you will find that it would actually read exactly like Paro. Page 498 in your Art Scroll Chumashim. Moshe comes down from the mountain and he sees this golden calf and he says to Aaron, what in the world is going on over here? And Aaron says, we're on page 498, and if you want to look it up, is this verse 24. V'omar lehem, and I said to them, the Mizah, who has gold? He spoke about it, and they took it off and they gave it to me. And I threw it into the fire. And this egel comes out. And now look at the word, and you will find this word 2 times in the verse. And again, as I said, one of them will look pretty familiar, because if you take away the dots as you read it in the Torah, I am sure there are many people that have made this mistake over the years. Moshe saw the people. Ki faruahu. Oh, that's funny. I thought already, like, where, because it's Hanukkah, we had to have the church bells ringing also, That's brilliant, Shmuley. I love it. Yeah. Moshe saw the nation. He's looking at the nation now. He's having a bit of a look to see what is going on. Ki faruahu. Yeah, what's the word faruah? Read it now in the Hebrew. How is it spelled? Pei, resh, ayin. And now wait for the next word. Ki Pharaoh Aharon. Pharaoh Aharon is spelled how? With a hey at the end, which could be without, take away the dots. How would you read that? Paro. That is the word paro. Yeah, do you see that, Roger? Yeah, there's paro. There's the word paro. It's there just with a different, and therefore says Rav Hirsch, when we talk about Pharaoh means expose. For Aaron had exposed them to disgrace amongst those who rise up against them. That's what the verse means over there. We're not going to discuss exactly the meaning of the verse over there. It comes up again, actually, so there it means exposed. Or the other word, the other time it comes up is in Pashas Tazria. When we talk about the person that gets tzaras, the person that gets leprosy, and we talk about what he needs to do. So, we say, page 616, if you want to look this one up, verse 45. Page 616, this is in Parshas Tazria, by Yikra 13:45. And the verse says the following. V'hatzorua shebo anega. The person who has tzaras, that has this nega, that has this blemish. Begodov yufrumim. His clothing should be rent, meaning should be ripped. Verosho yiyeh farua. What do you do with his hair? Let it grow wild. No, the hair of his head should be unshorn. You don't shave the head; it goes wild, right? V'asofam yaten. He should cover himself all the way down to his mustache. V'tomei tomei yikra, and he calls out tomei tomei. I am tomei. That's what he calls out. But what we see over here is, again, the word farua. What does the word farua mean? Unkempt, open, etc., etc. Says Rav Hirsch, if you read about Egypt, you will find that Egypt was a place that had many, many boundaries, a very locked down place. So much so that even the word Egypt, what would be the root for the word of Egypt? Shmuley, what would be the word? We'll say it tomorrow, actually, in Hallel. Mitzrayim. What was the root of Mitzrayim? Meitzar. Min ha-meitzar. Yeah? Min ha-meitzar karasi ka anoni b'merchavko. Right? In the beginning of, in the middle of Hallel. Right after the Hodel Hashem. Min ha-meitzar karasi ka. Yeah? What does meitzar mean? Meitzar means a border, but it also means being a tsar. Right? Kol olam kulo gesher tsar meod. Tsar means narrow, very constrained. Mina meitzar karosika means I was constrained. I called out to you from my constraints. Ononi, and you answered me by merchav, right? Like Rechavia, Rachav, wide, by merchav go. You answered me in a very wide way. You gave me a tremendous amount of breadth. So Mitzrayim is all about what? Constraints, boundaries, rules, etc., etc. So much so, if you look at Mitzrayim, especially after Yosef did it, what did Yosef do? We read about it in the next week's Sedra. Yosef gathered all the food together, and then the people came to Yosef and they said to Yosef, our food went rotten. We need stuff to eat. So he says, well, I'm not just giving it to you. I want your money. So they gave him the money. The next year they came back to me and says, we need more food. And I said, well, give me all your cattle and your animals. So he got all their animals. The next year they came back to him and says, we need food again, but we have got nothing left. We have no more money because we paid all the money the first year to get food. We have no more animals. Says Yosef, what does he want of them? He wants their land, and he wants them to become servants to Pharaoh. And the arrangement was, first, taxation. The arrangement was a fifth, 20%, goes to Pharaoh, 80% goes to the rest of the people. That's the arrangement. So within the land of Egypt, nobody really owned this land anymore. There was a very constrained feeling. Nobody had anything because everything belonged to Pharaoh because they had to give it to Pharaoh to buy themselves out. Every person belonged to Pharaoh, right? Because they all everybody had a certain amount of taxes to give, and no matter what grew in your field, 20% of that went to Pharaoh. Very constraining, very restricted place. Who is the only person in Egypt that is not constricted, that is not restrained? The king, right? And therefore his name is Paro. Paro means without constraints. Farua, as we said before, unkempt, unshorn, not kept together. Because everybody else had to be kept in line. Everybody else had to be told exactly how and what to do. Pharaoh is the free man, the only free man in the entire of Egypt. And therefore, the reason we call his name Paro, the reason we call him Pharaoh is because we're referring to the fact you are the only free man here, whereas everybody else belongs to Pharaoh. Okay? I found that a very interesting idea. Again, he says that might not be 100% correct, because there's the question of, does Pharaoh come from the ancient Egyptian? It's a very nice explanation that we have in the Hebrew, but if the word Pharaoh comes from the ancient Egyptian, then that's not what it means. Yeah. Sometimes there are words that sound like one thing and something. You know, there's that song they used to sing. Who is he and he is she? Have you heard that? Yeah. Because he comes home and says, country Yassi, who is he? I mean, who is who? Who is he? I don't know. My teacher says, who is he? Yeah. Because in Hebrew, the word who is he. But he is she. And me is who. Right? So you get all confused. Right? There's a whole song about it for kids to learn. It's a very strange song, but it's very fun. But you can't say, so therefore, who is he? No, who is not he? Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's not what it is. The word says who, it's not WHO. It's hey vav aleph. You can't start playing around with the words. That's what our verse says. It's not necessarily correct, but it's almost correct. But there's a very, very great lesson within this. Okay.
Don't we have to qualify that for the priests?
I'm sorry?
The Egyptian priests.
You're right. The Egyptian priests actually were not, they also had a certain amount of freedom. That is true. So that it's not only Pharaoh, but I think the Egyptians still, the priests were under some form of rulership, whereas the only person that was entirely free was Pharaoh. Okay? Now we move on to something else. Pharaoh has these dreams. Yeah? And they come to Pharaoh and they try to tell him what the dreams mean. I mean, Pharaoh didn't need to come on. He didn't need this one slave that was in the that was languishing in a pit in a prison somewhere in Egypt. The first thing happened, he woke up in the morning. What do you think he did the first thing in the morning? Stargazers, magicians, everybody calling in. Big AGM. What is it? I've had a dream. This is my dream. What does it mean? Yeah. So it says the following. Verse 8. Vahiba Boker. We're now on page 222 again in the Art School Chumashim. It was in the morning, Vatipoim Ruchai, and the spirit was agitated. He was very, very nervous. Vaishlach, he sent. He called all the necromancers, the witchcraft people of Egypt, and all its wise people. Pharaoh told them his dream. And nobody was able to give Pharaoh an interpretation. Says Rashi, yes, they could give them an interpretation. Look at the last Rashi, Ein Posar on the Pharaoh. Posum hayosam avalo the Pharaoh. They did give it some form of interpretation. It didn't mean there was no interpretation. You think all the Egyptian people said that this is the most intelligent society in the world. We read the Torah sometimes and we read a lot of these things and we say, we're dealing with a whole bunch of nincompoops. You were not dealing with idiots. Not Avraham Avinu, and not Yitzchak, and not Yaakov, and not the Shvatim, and not everyone around them, and not the Egyptians, and nobody else. And we read this like we think we're like the God's gift to humanity, 2017. We're so clever. They're just so stupid. Of course they had ideas. Of course they had things that they had to say. But in Posar Osam, the Pharaoh means Pharaoh didn't like it. Pharaoh didn't agree. He felt, that's not it. I hear, but that's not right. I don't see that being correct. And that's what it says, because they said to him, you're going to have 7 daughters. Those 7 daughters are going to die. There were different interpretations that they gave him. And Pharaoh was unhappy. Now, why was Pharaoh unhappy? They're giving an interpretation. What's wrong with the interpretation?
The interpretations has been given.
But if it is, it's that kind of thing. Like, sometimes you get a bill and you're like, I can't figure out this bill. Have you ever gotten some of these electricity bills? From the 6th of January to the 8th of January at this amount. From the 8th of January to the 22nd of January, and you're reading through this bill. It's 6 pages long just to tell you how much electricity you use and how you look through it. You're like, can you just explain the thing to me? And you call up the guy and you call up in the. Imagine you call the electricity company and you ask them, whoever they might be, and you say, can you explain this to me? And they give you an explanation. You say, I don't like it. I'm not paying for it. What do you mean you don't like it? Tough luck. It's not up to you to like it or not to like it. This is this is what there is. Yeah. So If that's the explanation, that's the explanation. Why does Pharaoh turn around and say, I don't like this? I don't agree. I disagree with this. Who asked you? So the simple understanding of why Pharaoh did not agree with this is Pharaoh also understood something very important, and that is that if God is sending me a message, what kind of message will he send me as the king? A message that is a royal message. Having 7 daughters and losing 7 daughters, as terrible as it would be to lose 7 children, chas v'shalom, not to be wished upon anybody, even Pharaoh, but that's not a royal message. There's no reason God needed to send me a dream to tell me that beforehand. So you know what? Bad luck. True. But I don't feel that there's something in there for me. This is the simple explanation. A lot of people say that the king has royal dreams, and therefore his dreams will have to do with what? The monarchy and the country. And so therefore, if you come to me and give me a private interpretation and you say to me, do you know what this dream means? It means you personally are going to have X, and then you personally go, that Y is going to happen. To that, Pharaoh turns around and goes, that can't be right. God wouldn't have sent me, or whoever it was, whoever he believed God was. I wouldn't have received this divine message to tell me this narishkeit. It needs to be something a lot more important than that. And that's when Yosef comes and he says, no, it's a message for the entire country. It's telling you how to run the finances of the country. He says, Pharaoh, oh, there we go. Now there's a fellow that can figure this out. Now there's somebody that I can listen to and I can hear and I can understand. But he says, the Rav Hirsch says something beautiful over here as well. He says later on, when we read about the Sarah Mashkim and the Sarah Ophim, the wine butler, and you read about the royal baker, last week said, when they come to Yosef and they ask Yosef to interpret their dreams, and Yosef interprets their dreams. And then they realize exactly as Yosef said, that's what happened. How do they feel? Or what do they feel about Yosef? This guy knows what he's doing. What do they feel about it beforehand? So here says Rav Hirsch a beautiful thing. And I think it's a very, very important concept. And I think everybody here will agree with this concept. Have you ever heard something that has been so profound and so correct that even though you've never heard it before, you sit and you hear this one thing and you say to yourself, that must be true. That must be right. Yeah? Because truth has a certain ring to it. Truth has a certain way that when you hear truth, it strikes a chord. Do you know what I mean? You hear something and you say to yourself, that's probably right.
There's a Yorkshire expression.
Go on.
Stuff speaks.
Stuff speaks.
Yes.
Is that the nice way of saying it? Or is it worse than normally? Is that the right expression? Sometimes people go ahead and they change it. This is the rabbinic version of it. Stuff speaks, right? But that's right. If it's true, it speaks to you. It has to speak to you because you hear it and you say to yourself, gosh, that sounds just about right. Yeah? Very important point. And this is a brilliant thing that the Sarah Mashkim knew when he heard it. The royal wine merchant knew right away. The royal wine butler knew right away when he heard Yosef say, this is going to be the interpretation of the dreams. He goes, this guy's got a spawn on. I know he's got a spawn on. Sounds right. So therefore he comes to Pharaoh and he says, look, listen to this guy. But when you hear him, you'll hear what he has to say. You'll go, that must be it. That must be it. I get it. Yeah. And that's an amazing thing that we have. God has given us an internal, I don't know how you would describe it, but an internal feeling that we can use, that we can harness to realize and to understand truth. That's a beautiful thing. Okay, moving on from that. Just 2 more pieces. I think we're definitely going to have enough time to finish everything, hopefully. Great. So Yosef interprets the dreams, and here comes a very interesting part, the interesting thing that Yosef does. Have a look at verse 33. We're on page 226 now, at verse 33. So Yosef goes ahead and he says, if you start from the top of the page, in verse 25, V'yoma Yosef Paro Chalom Paro Echad. Who the dream of Paro is one. Eith Asher Elokim Osei Gilafar. What God is doing, He's going to tell Pharaoh, and then he goes through the entire dream, and he says the 7 fat cows and the 7 thin cows, and then he goes through the 7 thick sheets of wheat and the 7 thin sheets of wheat, and he says that's what it means, and it's going to be plenty, and then afterwards it's going to be a famine, and it's saying it twice because it's going to happen immediately, and he's giving you the entire story. And then now look at verse 33. Now let Pharaoh seek out a discerning and wise man and send him over the land of Egypt. Well, what's Yosef doing now? What has he moved on from what to what? He's moved from interpreting the dream to doing what?
Advice.
Giving advice. Now, I don't know about you, but I can tell you one thing for sure. Pharaoh was not a friendly soul. This is the olden style monarch. It's not like the queen today. The olden style monarch, if they didn't like something you said, what happened? Your head and your shoulders weren't as good friends anymore. Yeah? You don't start up with Pharaoh. You don't turn around and say to Pharaoh, and by the way, Pharaoh, let me give you some advice now. You want to know what to do? This is what I advise you. Who asked you? Where did Yosef get the chutzpah from to advise Pharaoh what to do? He's not been called in as a royal advisor. He's been called in for one thing and one thing only. Interpret the dream and get out of here. Right? There was no prospect at the time of Yosef even making it out of jail. Even if Yosef had interpreted the dream correctly, Pharaoh could have said, that's brilliant, back into jail with him. He could have. Yeah. So this is a very, very risky move. What's he doing that for? Why does Yosef do this? Why does Yosef risk himself over here in offering Pharaoh advice exactly how to run his finances? Yeah. Says the Orach Chaim. 2 things. First of all, he says, let's look back at the dream. You have 7 fat cows grazing. And then you have 7 thin cows that come out of the river. And what do the thin cows do? They eat the fat ones, and you can't even tell that the fat ones came into the thin ones. They're still looking as scrawny and horrible and terrible as they always have. It's like, I don't know if you've ever seen those. Here in England, you see cats. They look nice and plump and beautiful. Because most cats have owners, and the owners feed the cats, and they tend to the cats, and they look very, very good. In Israel, you're full of stray cats, and the cats look just horrible. These cats walk through the street, and they look scrawny and horrible and disgusting and dirty and full of disease. Cats in Israel is not the same thing as cats in England. Cats in England are lovely, like somebody once said, owning a cat in Israel is akin to owning a street rat in New York. Yeah? Why would you own a cat? It's a horrible thing to own in Israel. There are cats all over the place. You look at them, they look terrible. They look unhealthy, and they look just ew. And that's what you have. You have these horrible-looking cows that come out and devour the fat cows. What do the fat cows symbolize? The plenty. But what exactly? The 7 plentiful years. There were 7 fat cows. That's 7 plentiful years. What do the 7 thin cows symbolize? 7 years of famine. The 7 years of famine eat up the 7 years of plenty. Therefore, what is the symbolism in that? That the famine will be sustained by the 7 years of plenty. Pardon? That's what the dream is. So therefore, Yosef's not saying, I'm not giving you advice over here. I'm just telling you what the dream is saying. Read the dream. You got 7 fat cows, you got 7 thin cows. The 7 thin cows are 7 years of famine, and they're eating up the 7 fat cows. What does that mean? Just plain understanding of the dream is those 7 years will be sustained through money and through wealth and through agriculture that has been produced in the first 7 years. And therefore Yosef says, I'm sorry, this is part of the dream. I'm not trying to advise you over here. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. I'm just trying to explain the dream to you. The dream means you have to do the utmost that you can in the next 7 years, so that the next 7 years after that will be able to be sustained by these 7 years. That's just how to read it. Yeah? That's what the Ohr HaChaim says. That's the first thing. But the second thing is an even more important, a great lesson over here, and a Hasidic lesson. And I'll tell you a Hasidic story afterwards. And then we'll get to Hanukkah as well with that. And that's the following. He says, if God shows you something, he is sending you a message, as we said before. Before we said it's a royal message, right? But anything, it doesn't mean only Pharaoh. Anything that we as human beings see in our daily lives has been shown to us for a reason. It's not just random. You sit here and whatever happens, happens. There's no such thing as random occurrences. If God has made something happen and has allowed you to see it, it's for you to take heed and take notice of it. Sforno even takes it one step further. It's not only to take heed and take notice of it. Sforno says, and it would be sinful if you ignored it. Yeah? Imagine if I came and I knocked on at your door, and do you have a son in university still, Ian?
Not now.
Not anymore, right? You got a daughter in university, right? No. Not anymore, they've all graduated. Imagine last year, 2 years ago, your daughter was in university, and there was a knock at the door, and she opens up the door, and there's her professor. And he says to her, Natasha, I like you as a student. I want to give you the questions for the examination. Are you happy to take those? No, I'm busy studying now. Please go out. No, but I want to give you the questions and the answers. I don't have time to talk to you now, Professor. I'm too busy studying. What would you say about her? Barmy. Yeah? I'm not saying that about your daughter. God forbid. I've not said that. Right? But that's what you would say. It's sinful not to listen. So as far now, if God is sending you a message and you could listen and you don't, it would be sinful for Pharaoh not to hear what God has to say. I don't want to. I just want to know what the dream means. I want you to go away. What do you mean? If God sent you a dream, what did he send you the dream for? So you should hear it and then move on with your life. I'm too busy studying to listen to the dream. Obviously, he meant for you to take this dream and to do something with it. You have to do something with it. And therefore, he says you have to go ahead and therefore, Yosef felt the need. He says, I had to give the advice as well, because that's part of it. If God sends someone a dream and God sends someone a premonition in this dream and tells him what's going to happen is X, Y, and Z, then you need to heed that lesson and you need to change your entire life or the focus of whatever you're doing in order to be able to move with that lesson. Obviously, we don't have Nevi'im anymore, so we don't have straight lessons. But they had they had a lesson. They knew exactly what this lesson meant. They knew what God wanted from them. Says Yosef, I know what God wants from you, and therefore God wants you to do X, Y, and Z. Because otherwise he wouldn't have sent you this dream. Because you can't just ignore it. Yeah? And that is there's a famous Hasidic story that they tell with, I think it was a rabbi by the name of they call him the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, that after the sefer that he wrote. I'm not sure what his full name was, but I think it was Yaakov Yosef, but I don't really know what it is. Shmuley? No, sorry.
The Hasidim told us Yaakov Yosef.
The Hasidim tells Yaakov Yosef. I mean, it's one of their standard that works. I mean, it's a big sefer. And he was a Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov, but before he became a Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov, a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov and of Chassidus, he was a misnagid. A misnagid means somebody who was against Chassidus. Nowadays, we don't have people that are against Chassidus. We have Chassidim, we have people that are not Chassidim. But there's nobody nowadays that turns around and says, Chassidus is wrong. It's not wrong. It's another way. It doesn't speak to you, fine. There are people to whom Chassidus speaks to very, very strongly. There are people to whom Chassidus doesn't speak to at all. It's different ways of getting to the same thing, of getting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's just another brand of serving Hashem through the framework of Torah. So he said this, Baal Shem Tov says to this Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, I want you to know that God sends messages to every single person. And not only does he send messages to every single person, sometimes he will send them messages with the most simplest of people for you to hear the message. Says Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, that's ridiculous. He says, it's not ridiculous. God sends me. No, you and your Hasidim and all your esoteric rubbish. No, it's not true. God does not send these messages. I don't believe that. I can't hear that. I can't believe that. Says the Baal Shem Tov to him, you can. You just don't want to. Right? That's what Baal Shem Tov said to him. That's the end of the conversation that they had. After that, the Baal Shem Tov, he takes leave of the Baal Shem Tov. He's walking through the streets, and he found a wagon. And the wagon had gotten stuck in the mud. And he's deeply stuck in the mud. It's not like nowadays, when we don't get stuck so much here in the snow, but I remember in America when you had cars and there were big snow banks and you got snowed in, you needed 2 or 3 people just behind you. You'd back up and 2 or 3 people push together with you, and hopefully you get over, because otherwise you just skid in the snow and you dig yourself deeper and deeper. You need somebody to push you out. So here was a fellow who gotten stuck and he needs someone to help push him out. Hi, Phil. This is a record. We have 10 people here tonight. This is fantastic. Very, most pleased. Could we just everybody move on over and make room for Phil? Sorry. So, and could you just move over the seat as well? And if you move, everybody moves over 1 seat, there'll be an extra seat here. Yeah, Ellie, if you move over 1 seat, please. Sorry. That is a cold seat, by the way, because that leather is quite cold. So, says, coming back to what I was saying. So he's walking down the street and he finds this fellow who's gotten his horse and wagon stuck either in the snow or in the dirt, whatever it is. And he says, Sir, could you help me? I'm busy now. Sir, could you help me? He says, no, I can't. He says, yes, you can. You just don't want to. Right? Ding. That's right. That was an aha moment there. And he goes, that's a true story. And he turned around and he says, I can't believe it. I just heard that sentence an hour and a half ago. I was arguing with the Baal Shem Tov. He ran back to the Baal Shem Tov. He became one of the biggest disciples of the Baal Shem Tov. Right? And that's what they tell you in Chassidus, is that great messages don't have to always come through great emissaries. There could be a simple person that sends you a very tremendous message. And there could be a person who's very, very important who's talking rubbish. It doesn't have to be that way. There's no rules. And therefore, that's what we learn over here also with Yosef. If God gave you that message, if he sent you this as something for you to know or for you to understand, then it means he wants you to act upon it and he wants you to hear the messages. He doesn't want you to just ignore it and say, there's nothing to it. That's wrong. That would be wrong for us to do. And that brings us back to Hanukkah, as we spoke about it before. So Hanukkah, you come back. They come back into the Beis Hamikdash. The Beis Hamikdash is lying in total disarray. And the Greeks. We were so busy talking about the Egyptians before. The Greeks had taken every single bottle of oil and they had made it tameh. They had made it impure. Every single bottle of oil. And they decided to look, and they looked, and they looked, and they found 1 bottle of oil. And what does that 1 bottle of oil have? It's got the seal of the Kohen Gadol. This is pure. But how long is it going to take them to make fresh oil? Well, it's going to take them, 7 days. So on the 8th day, they'll have oil. So, all right, they might be able to light this today. There'll be another 7 days until they really have oil. So, what'd you light it for? Well, why'd you use this? You knew that at one point or another you're going to have to use non-kosher oil. So why do you need to use this? The answer is, so some people said, well, because, if it comes up, if you can, you should try. But I think there's a great answer over here as well, understanding it from the vantage point that we just mentioned before, and that is, if God sends you a message, it's for a purpose. And if God sends you a flask of oil, why did he send you? Why did they get that flask of oil? Just to go, we found a flask of oil. Okay, now let's use the other oil. This one's not big enough anyway. You're right, it might not be big enough. But you could have not found this one at all. They could have looked around, they could have found nothing. No oil whatsoever. God could have closed their eyes. Have you ever had that? You know, I've had this a few times. They have this saying that you say, Omar Rabbi Yamin said, Ha'ako b'cheska sumenem, everybody is like blind, Acha HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Pokech Esneim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu opens their eyes, Shnema Yifrach Elikim Esedeh, HaKadosh Baruch Hu opens her eyes, Ater Be'amayim. Hagar suddenly opens her eyes and she sees this well of water. And people say this when they've lost something. They say sometimes, have you ever lost something and you've looked around the entire house and you sit down and you go, I can't find it. Wow, it's here. Yeah, has it happened to you? And you're like, what? I've run around the whole entire house looking for this stupid item. I sit down to eat breakfast, telling my wife I can't find it, and she just says, well, it's on the table right next to you. Because sometimes you're blind until you see it. Till God opens up your eyes, you'll be blind. You won't find it. You go around and you won't find it. And then God opens up your eyes. God opened up their eyes over here and he let them find. But how much did he let them find? 1 day. Do you know what they could have said? Who needs 1 day's worth of oil? What's 1 day's worth of oil worth anyway when we need 8 days? Stupid. So I said, if God sent us 1 day, why did he send us 1 day for? If not to use it. Why did he give us that day? If he didn't want us, if he wanted us to ignore it. What happens tomorrow? Okay, tomorrow we'll worry about tomorrow. But today we got a sign from God that he sent us this 1 day. We have to use it today. We can't ignore it for today. And so they used it. And suddenly they realized there was this tremendous miracle. Suddenly God showed them, you were willing to put your trust and your faith in me. You were willing to say, if you find 1 day, at least God sent us a message, let's use this 1 day. I can let it burn for 8 days also. That's not an issue. I got no problem with that, says God. I can easily make it burn for 20 and 100 days also. Just won't run out. And that's the tremendous thing of Hanukkah as well. So to finish off with that, which is on Hanukkah, they learned the lesson that God says, if I send you a message, it is there for you to read it. Don't ignore God's messages. We have messages every single day that come to us in different forms. Whether you're walking down the street and you see somebody that is not as fortunate as you. So take a message and say, take a lesson from that. Rav Avigdor Miller used to speak about it a lot. You walk down the street and you see somebody, sadly, that is homeless. You know, there's lots of talk about homeless people, especially around the festive period. And it's terrible that there are homeless people out there. It's terrible. But what can we learn from it? Thank you, Hashem. I have a house. I have a roof over my head. Not only that, I own it. Okay, it's mortgaged, but at least I own some of it. But even if I was renting, it's still better than sleeping on the street. Thank you, Hashem, for giving me the ability to pay my rent and for allowing me and my family to live under a roof that doesn't leak. You pass by somebody that might not have the best of health. I don't want to give specific examples, but whatever it might be. And you can say to yourself, you know, pass by somebody that can't walk, is challenged with his legs. I can walk, thank God. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave me legs. Everything in this world, every person, every item can be used as another message from Hashem if you learn how to decipher those messages. And that's what the Pasha is telling us over here. Yosef says, if God sent you a dream, it's there to be deciphered. It's a message for you. You cannot ignore it. You're not allowed to ignore it, and I'm not going to let it get away with it. And therefore, even though I've not been asked even to explain the dream to you or to give you advice, I have to give you advice. Because God didn't send you a message to ignore. He gave you a message for you to take the advice. So the advice is part of the message. The lesson is part of the message. To get a message and to ignore it is like that student that says, I'm too busy learning now. I don't want to hear the answers from the teacher. You wouldn't do that. God's sending us messages every day. He sends us messages on Hanukkah, a great message of love. Let us all celebrate this Hanukkah together. Let it be a Hanukkah of love together for the Jewish people and of happiness, health, and first and foremost, peace for all those, especially those in Eretz Yisrael who might be in trouble now with Jerusalem and everything else. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to those who tuned in live. Thank you to everybody else who came in person.